Welcome, welcome to our webinar. We're very happy to see you. We like seeing people, so feel free to turn on your screen so we can get some FaceTime and to use the chat. Please introduce yourself. Let us know where you're listening from, anything that inspired you to come today. We would really love to do that, and we're going to be reading the chat in detail. Also, as you have questions, pop them into the chat. At the end, we'll have a chance for some Q&A and to go back and forth.
And we'd also love to know anything about you guys, where you're from, but also curious about how many of you are here professionally versus personally, or both.
Even if you're here professionally, there's probably some personal stuff in there.
Everybody, all of us who don't have So, all right, let's jump in. I'm Ann Kelley.
And I am Sue Marriott.
So Sue and I have been therapists for over 30 years each, so it's a lot of years. And we have had the privilege, we have had the privilege of being able to study, learn, train under, and use in our practice interpersonal neurobiology, diving deep into attachment, et cetera. And we have continuously seen how impactful it is. And in that process, just changes. It helps people really de-shame what's going on, build connections. And that's what this process is about, what we're going to be talking about today. And part of that is that we learn from each other and
what not to do.
But
and what to do.
Because it affected us so much and we saw the positive, we wanted to do more. Everybody, all therapists want to do some pro bono, et cetera, to be able to expand. But we started a podcast about 8 years ago called Therapist Uncensored, because we really wanted to take this information and be able to broaden the exposure to people who can't walk into a therapist office, either because of culture, finances, or just personal blocks.
Or just even physical location. Sometimes there's no therapist available.
And what's been amazing about that is that we've been out there 8 or 9 years, and Therapist Uncensored now has 11 million downloads
around the world, which is insane.
And heard in almost every country. And why we're bringing that up today is what that's really about for us is that many people across the world in different cultures want to learn and deepen their own sense of security for themselves and have more connections. And we need that. And that to us is just really heartening in a world that feels so divisive, so polarized, that there's so many people like you guys joining today that want to do the work and the journey to deepen ourselves, to get out of reactivity and form connections. And that's exciting for us.
It definitely is. And I love this slide because this is what we're highlighting here, is that when we're in our, it's basically our vagal system, when we're in a secure state, that it is good for your body. It is good for you emotionally, physically, spiritually. It is even good for your longevity. This has been related to length of life. And the reason for that is that the more we can do this, we can manage some of those stress responses, which is part of the things that causes so many physical problems and emotional problems.
Right.
So in thinking about what secure relating is, I want you to think about it. This is not the same thing as attachment. We're not talking about secure attachment. We love secure attachment. We'll say more about that in a minute. But secure attachment is a much harder thing to achieve. A cultivated state of mind is something that is much more realistic and reasonable. And we're going to be able to create that. So basically, the very, very early attachment researcher Ainsworth said that secure relating is a cultivated state of mind. This is a paraphrase, but where we are untroubled. And I really love the word untroubled about the resources that we have available. And by resources, it means all kinds of resources, but also it means being able to ask for help, right, so that we don't have to do it ourselves. So cultivated state of mind, being able to not be vigilant, and that we have the capacity. So when these little questions, when that little light bulb comes up, these are just kind of really begin to think about yourself Like the more active you can be, the more you'll get from this. You might, if you want to answer in the chat, that's great. Or answer in your mind or on a back of an envelope, we're good.
So why we're using secure relating, which I love that, is to think of this concept. And in fact, our book, we've written a book called Secure Relating, Holding Your Own in an Insecure World. And I think we believe you'll understand the title even more deeply if you haven't even heard of the book after you see this presentation, because as she was saying, secure relating is so amazing for us, but why don't we do it? Right? Why don't we just
Why don't you do it?
why don't we just always stay in our most secure selves?
Why aren't you always with your soft voice? And
by the way, I don't know if we've
shoot,
revealed the fact.
Yes, hold on. One of our best credentials is that we are a married couple, and which just means just imagine doing a complex project like a podcast or writing a book or even doing a webinar with your special person. And that might give you a feeling of like, okay, well, if they can do that, and that's the bar. It's not that we've got it all together.
It's not that we've got it all together, yeah.
But at least we're able to cooperate to this extent.
And apply.
So it does help, right? But also we mentioning that partly because it's like, and we're parents and pets and all the things. So we're with you on this journey. It's more of like we're arm in arm with you.
Mm-hmm.
We're not telling
preaching
you how
to you.
do it. That's right. So defensive patterns is what we're interested in today's webinar. And if you, I don't know who on the screen you might can relate to. I kind of like the girl with the finger.
I think I can relate to, like you were talking about the book. I can relate to every single moment in this.
Yeah.
But the the thing is, we all have defensive patterns, and they're repetitive. And I think that's the core. It's the core of what we can see that is our pain point for us as individuals. I do a lot of couples work. Sue does a lot of group work. And it is those repetitive patterns that we do. We tell ourselves, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to yell at my kid or walk out and slam the door during a fight. And yet we find ourselves repeating those patterns. And that pain point.
Being sarcastic. You love it when I get sarcastic.
I love that about you. Being but we do it for a reason. And that is, the key is when we start to think about these defenses, as they are patterns and they're repetitive for a reason, right? Like they're repetitive because if we see the patterns, instead of feeling more hopeless, oftentimes in couples, I find those repetitive patterns make people feel more hopeless or more frustrated, more shame.
Despair.
Yeah. You feel either shame because you tell yourself you're going to do something different and you don't, or you feel hurt because you tell your partner or your child not to do it and they do. And you're like, if you love me, you wouldn't do that. Or people give up on partnerships because we keep having repetitive patterns. We want you to think about, during this workshop, repetitive patterns being a window, a very extremely helpful window, because those defensive patterns were adaptive for you and you developed them at a certain time in your life. And if you see it as information rather than a pain in the ass, then
see that.
then it's a good thing. So think about it for you guys. When you think about yourself, what are your defensive patterns?
I'm wondering, because we can't see them, like how many of them are being like, I don't have any defensive patterns.
I don't have any defensive.
So I hope in the chat you're like backing us up here that most people have something. And this is what we want you to get intensely curious about. And this is where attachment comes in. I know you love to say this one, right? Instead of the idea of, look, it's just how I am. I'm just, you know what? I'm just a sarcastic person. That's just how I am. That the idea is, no, actually, this has to do with early adaptations. Sarcasm isn't the best example of that. But
well, actually, sarcasm's pretty good because it's a defensive pattern that protects you. There's funny sarcasm where we both laugh with each other.
Right.
But when you have certain patterns of defense that make intimacy scary.
Yeah, if I'm critical.
Right. Then I can be sarcastic in a critical way and not acknowledge that I'm feeling aggression.
Right.
So it's a really.
And where that goes back to attachment is that I got wired in very early. I was conditioned not to be vulnerable. So, and just using this example, teasing or sarcasm, kind of putting people down and then saying, what, I'm just joking.
You're
then
so sensitive.
you're so sensitive, right?
Yeah.
That is, we can begin, one thing doesn't matter. We're looking for patterns of behavior.
Right.
It's not just somebody being sarcastic once. It's when you notice, how comfortable you are with one another, and can you turn to one another? Can you talk to one another? Now, what we've done is we've really expanded the idea of attachment. If you're interested in attachment, there's a lot of resources that we've done on the podcast and the book. In the course that's going to be coming up, we definitely say more about the history of attachment and all the good juicy details. I think for this webinar, we're here just to figure out, okay, what do we do about this? So we're going to mention modern attachment, but not go into it very much. It includes relational neurobiology, lifetime of relational experiences, and what you almost never hear about when it comes to the nervous system and attachment is context. And context is really important because attachment insecurity can often be confused with or conflated with a whole lot of other things that also affect our nervous system. And, I think here probably is a good time to say the weird thing, right?
Yes, I love
Western, educated, industrial, rich, democratic, that there was a paper, and it's a little bit dated now, but I couldn't find anything updating it, and I'm positive it's still similar. 96% of people who study like human development and their research subjects, who they're studying, are weird, Western, educated, industrial, rich, democratic. And then, but that's only a small percentage of the world. And then we project what human development is supposed to look like all across the world. So we've made a lot of strides in culture and stuff like that. But this is just a point that modern attachment in our eyes is we always have to think about context. And
we also have to think about how systems create insecurity. Right. One of the things about the training that we did early in our graduate program about attachment, it was very focused on mother-child interactions. Not only does that promote a great amount of guilt that
for the moms,
for the mothers, like everything falls on the mom. I think moms out there can relate to that experience. It actually isn't accurate. Like early caregiving is huge. We're not going to get away from that. But it's all the caregiving is really impactful, but so are peers, systems, the socioeconomic level, all of those impact how you are developed and how your nervous system is developed, as well as how you're received. We mentioned we're a gay couple. So expectations we have in traditional relationships of what we learn, we could start to develop a sense of insecurity that impacts our later relationships because the system we live in doesn't accept us. And that is important for racial norms.
That's right. And, or like if, people assume that if you're in poly relationships, it's a sign of insecurity, things like that. Also, mentioning that, we have so much privilege, right? That, so even though we can claim that one, there's a way in which also we're really trying to expand this for people that really do fall outside the norms. They're going to be the ones that are pulled over. So our point here is that so many things impact. This is going to be too complicated of a slide. You're going to get it in your downloads for sure. But the idea here is that instead of thinking attachment as a dyad, this is this rich big tree. And it goes all the way back to history, colonization, migration, historical trauma. And then as you go up the thing, relate the root, the bark, what is it called? Trunk.
The trunk. Think of the trunk as our growth and development as humans, instead of
just getting in their hardwiring.
Right. Yeah. Right. Instead of just thinking about our attachment being our mother-child relationship, people come into therapy and say, I just think about it. I have this insecurity, but I had this great relationship with this parent. This is to really expand our concept. And there's a lot in our course, in our book about this, about how these things impact our nervous system development, the developmental attachment, and then the stresses that are coming in from the above that continues to impact.
Right. So, and this is positive too, because when you have like spiritual support and things like that, that gets into your nervous system. When you have religious attacks, that gets into your nervous system. Politics, all the isms, economics, of course, public policy. Think of our trans sisters and brothers, and I don't know what the plural is of sisters and brothers, but our friends that are being attacked in public policy. So basically the gist here is that all of these things get into your hardwiring.
Yes.
And speak about hardwiring.
So, so the important part when we think about differences between people or even our own defense system, we always think about it as thoughts. Our thoughts are different. If we could just change each other's perspective on things, life's going to be different. But all of what you saw in that tree deeply impacts the brain development. It is not just our cognition that gets impacted and our beliefs. Literally, research shows that the level of stress we have, the level of support we have, all of those go to impact the size of these are the major areas.
Yeah, you can't do relational neurobiology without at least knowing these three guys.
Yeah.
The amygdala, which we're going to talk more about actually here, that's lit up right there in the corner. And this is so much. And again, we're oversimplifying. We're going quick here, but the idea here is that it's not you, it's your amygdala. That's kind of where we're going. It's not you, it's your amygdala. Eventually, it'll be it's not them, it's their amygdala.
Because the amygdala, all of the information we were talking about in the tree, to think about that it actually does impact even the size of one's amygdala as it grows in utero, as well as
And the
early development,
hippocampus.
size of the hippocampus, which has to do with our memory intake, the size, the density of these different, it directly impacts that. So when we're getting frustrated with each other, and it impacts what kind of information we take in or don't take in, and we'll get a little bit more into that in a few minutes.
That's right, totally. The hippocampus we love because that comes on about 4 or 5 years old. That's when parents kind of can relax because it's our holder of time. Think of it like an editor. And this hasn't always been this way. This won't always be this way. The amygdala is saying everything that's happening right now is all that's happening.
Yeah.
And then the prefrontal cortex comes online and it kind of manages the whole thing. An easier way to think of it is the horse and rider, right? That we have this big body that is just really trying to do what it's doing. There's nothing wrong with the horse. Our body is doing exactly what it's designed to do. The ideal thing is you have this collaboration between the rider and the horse. Now, sometimes we don't have collaboration. This is what we're calling the limbic hijack. Many of you will be familiar with Dan Siegel's, flip your lid. It's when we lose our prefrontal cortex. So we want to have these relationships with our bodies and with our nervous system. And this was me bragging about me managing my pony, which we all know is not necessarily exactly true. And then the point here is that if I've got such a job to manage my horse and to be in relationship with my body and to be able to soothe the horse, imagine now you've got a horse, you have a rider, I have a horse, I have a rider. Co-regulation is really a thing. And when this picture, I was kind of thinking Ann was the vigilant one looking out, and I'm the one going, I don't know what's happening.
So all of that information, so obviously we just went through a lot of information really fast. In our course, we go a lot slower, but there's so much wealth of information out there, but we can learn it and hear it. But what do you do with it? Like, how do you make sense of it so that it's actually useful in your everyday life? That's not easy to do. And that's one reason that Sue and I created this framework, and we call it the Modern Attachment Regulation Framework. So this image here, we're going to dissect it as we go down to help you understand how the information that we understand now from modern attachment neurobiology can be used every day for yourself. So kind of take a peek at this. The core of this centers on, again, secure relating is about your state. It is a state. It isn't about your overall system. The more we can tune into our state, the better.
Right. So what this represents, the spectrum itself is kind of like the weather. It's whatever you're feeling in the moment. And this has to do with attachment activation. This is not the same thing. Many of you have heard of polyvagal theory and sympathetic and parasympathetic and things like that. This is more, does my attachment system fire up? So if the green zone is that secure space that we've been talking about.
And when we're in that secure space, we know it. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on.
That's right. And that's, the social connection system. What we're calling it is the connection system. And then as our brains, as that little amygdala HPA axis perceives threat, then we're going to we're going to activate in one way or the other. We tend to upregulate or downregulate. This is true for humans. This is true for mammals. This is true for, we move
Right.
towards the situation or we move away. If we move up, well, actually, I'll get to the next slide, but I want to, those of you that are really nerdy and really paying attention will notice these little splashes of color at the end of the spectrum on each side. That's just reminding everybody that, like, I can go dorsal, I can go withdrawn and zipped up and like I'm fine, blah 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 blah.
Right.
But coming out of it, I don't necessarily just go straight to green. I might kind of be like, I don't care, and then get mad and then like go up. And the same thing if I'm up and then I'm on the ceiling and I'm anxious and I'm preoccupied, I can move right into like collapse and drop. So that's just a reminder about that.
So again, we're going to remind you, because the center of this, we want you to visualize a spectrum. You'll hear us reference a spectrum. And one of the useful things about this is you can visualize a spectrum in your own mind. So you can use this not with a piece of paper in your hand. We want you to be able to utilize it through your imagination. But to accentuate something that Sue said, this is not just sympathetic and parasympathetic activation. This is relational activation. And what we have learned in our life, if we move up, that means that our attachment system is almost hyperactive, so that we're very focused on our attachment being or the loss of it. So that's where you see the reactive and then the preoccupied. We become more focused on not losing or staying connected. Where if we go down to the blue in our language, we're becoming blue. We use colors because it's non-pathologizing. If I say, Sue, you're being dismissing, you're being dismissive, right? You're being avoidant. That's not going to go as well as like, you're feeling a little blue to me, feels a little bit different.
Indigo.
Well, and we all have different shades depending on our history, but think of your state, because we all do all of these. But if you may then be overwhelmed by the attachment experience, you might get self-protective. You become more rational. You kind of reduce the emotional impact. And the more we get activated, we want to push away from the attachment experience. We become withdrawn, emotionally shut down, and then we're more angry avoidant. Like, I got to get out of here. And we could probably all relate to being anywhere on the spectrum.
Right. And feel free to chat it up. Like, where, like right away, what's your tendency? This one we just skipped over really quickly. We're just going to go back because every webinar needs to have something with a lot of arrows. But this is just a reminder of the stress system and how that, like we mentioned, even if it's external stressors or stressors in your relationship or what have you, they from an ongoing basis impact your hippocampus, your amygdala functioning. We have a harder time getting the rider has a harder time managing when the horse never really relaxes. Is kind of the point of that. And then we also just want to mention that even something as simple as difference will activate our threat system. So there's this, mirror, what they used to call them mirror neurons, where they say they're really more like sponge neurons that kind of pick up the intention. That if I'm seeing somebody, let's say I was raised in a Christian church and heard hymns my whole life, that I can just begin to hear just notes of a hymn, and my mirror neuron system or my sponge neuron system is going to fire up, and I'm going to feel safe, and I'm going to believe those people more, and I'm going to it's going to have this cascade effect. Now, if somebody is praying and they pray with their forehead to the floor, and I've never experienced that, it feels scary and weird to me. And so my threat system is going on, and now I'm going to project all kinds of things around because I won't really know that I'm threatened. I'll just have some aversive reaction to it, and I won't understand why. So we put this in here to really kind of go back to that systems thing about the building security and building your capacity to stay in the green zone, where that, I can sort of feel that makes me uncomfortable, but I'm not going to lose my mind. I'm not going to lose my thinking. Then that makes the whole world safer. We're more generous when we're in the green zone.
We're
more flexible.
We're less racist.
We can perspective take. We're less discriminatory. So this is part of our passion about doing that. And so
one of the things we keep referring to the green zone. You're going to hear that a lot because that's our language. How do we, every little moment that we move towards the green zone, calms that whole spiral. It brings us oxytocin. It allows us to feel more connected. So we're going to be talking about the connection system and the protection system. And if you take nothing else from today, the idea of just self-referencing yourself, am I in my connection system or am I in my defenses, is really an important step. But we have to sometimes, if our defenses are so familiar to us, because we do them all the time, we don't always recognize them as defenses, which is about what we want to tap on today. But it's important that connection is not just about being in partnership. Like here, when you have connected to somebody else, your entire body responds differently. But that you can also be deeply in the green and connected to yourself and feel in a secure state. So that's a really important distinction.
Right. It's not just social engagement.
Yeah.
It's not just social engagement. And again, we want you to think about your own, how do you know when you're in the green zone? And, you and I have talked about this a lot. Like one of the things I look for from Ann, because our body gives us away. This isn't something we can think our way into. This is just biological truth. And vocal tone is one of the things associated with green zone, right? And so I'm looking for Ann's soft vocal tone, and then you might say,
yeah. So she can tell if I'm actually in a secure state by the way, the pace of my voice, etc. And sometimes when I think I'm in a secure state, I'm in the green zone. I'm here humming along. But when my voice starts going up, I mean, I have a loud voice anyway, but when my voice goes up,
you're like, I'm fine.
And I think I'm fine, right? But, and she's like looking and kind of responding. She could feel in her nervous system that I'm not, but I'm communicating when I don't know that my voice is raised and I have intensity. And we'll talk more about that.
Right, which hits the back of my brain.
That's a very good sign that I'm actually not likely in my connection system.
Right, that's right. And then now protection system is, we've been talking about it. Let's just think of it kind of as the horse. And again, the notion here, secure relating, is about taming, about being able to manage that. Yeah, I think we've covered that pretty well. This is, if you think about where we're going here, is an important concept called implicit memory.
Mm-hmm. Implicit. So if you see this image, you can imagine what this child, I mean, we obviously did somewhat of a humorous image, but we all have a different version of our history where it felt chaotic and a little way off. Like, how do I make sense of this? But we don't remember this. It is stored in our unconscious implicit memory. But that part of us rules so much of how our defenses develop. Right. I guess a good example is the humor, right? If I haven't learned that intimacy feels a pretty safe thing and that I might use humor as a block to intimacy or as an avenue, rather because I'm a little anxious about that, but I don't have a memory of why I would be anxious.
Right. So this is an important concept, because in therapy, we have to access in some way, form or fashion, our implicit system. And implicit basically means that these were patterns that got laid down pre-verbally right from the get-go. This system is the system that takes over. As a matter of fact, our horse has to be happy for us to play, for us to be in the green zone. If the limbic system feels threat, it just is going to end up taking over. And this is part of why that insight alone is never enough, or it's enough for something. It's enough for a bad habit, right? But if it's a destructive habit that I keep, like like if I'm negative self-talk or whatever it is, and then I know I want to do better, but it just will come right back. That is buried in the implicit, and that's why we've got to eventually get to a deeper experience. Then we have to work to uncover beliefs we didn't even know that we had that were impacting us today.
And how we represent that. So for those of you that are really familiar with attachment, often we talk about internal working models. In our Mars model, we talk about them as maps. And you'll notice on the spectrum here, we have them pinned. And that references two things. And again, this represents a lot. As simple as this image is, it actually represents a great deal of research up-to-date
So,
research.
yeah, 70 years of attachment science.
But updated research on modern attachment. And it was wonderful because we had Dan Siegel and Alan. We have all sorts of
The neuroscience.
Carol George review our book on this to make sure that we are being accurate. Our hope for this is to change our image. It's not true that you get what you get and you don't throw a fit, right? Like, so where are these maps represent?
Okay, what do you mean? Say more about that.
Okay.
I know what you mean, but I don't know it's clear.
Well, what it means is, like, some of us know, we might deeply know that we were raised in a way that intimacy is just really scary and hard for us. And instead we tell ourselves, I just don't need relationships, or I just don't like the amount of closeness that other people do.
People are needy.
Or we interpret people as needy.
Those needy people out there. I'm not needy, but oh boy,
everybody else is needy. So we tell people, so the truth is we use it as a map that represents, like, all of us, you do all of these defenses, right? But because of that implicit learning we've been talking about, we've learned specific patterns that we use more and more and more, that we are our go-to, especially when we're activated relationally.
The stress.
Right. We might be great at work, but when with our partner, our children, we might lean more red and be very vigilant, or we might lean blue. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But we'd like to think of yourself as like which patterns, and realize that the pin represents. And the truth is, every time we learn to securely relate in a moment together, when Sue and I do, it actually is impacting the part of our implicit that is in an alarm bell. It's learning to be safer. So
that's part of how therapy works.
Yeah.
It's not what you talk about. It's the accumulation of experience where you're feeling safe, revealing yourself, where you feel known, where you feel taken in. That's part of how it gets into the implicit.
It's actually what they have found is the biggest outcome variable out of, if they do a meta-analysis on all the types of therapy, it is the safe relational connection that actually leads to the deeper change. And you could have that in all relationships when we focus on, but you have to recognize where your map is.
Right. And here's the thing, is that this stuff is so buried that, it's just like somebody can be teaching a class on child parenting and then go home and yell at their kid, right? It's like really that kind of cut off. Projections are real. Transference is real. And this is where we begin to get, if you notice things that you project, that's this window that Ann was talking about, where we can kind of follow it back to intuit what must be in our implicit system. So if you
I love this one, because Sue and I probably, like, I'm the one over there looking at the independent bird, and I'm there with all the family there, and I'm going, oh, that poor bird, he's all alone, And
right.
And Sue might be interpreting that as like, oh my gosh, look at the freedom they have,
or even that's freedom. Look at the freedom. It might be this is an internal belief of feeling trapped, and it's like, oh, look at the freedom. The notion is that the same stimulus. This is why group therapy is so fantastic, because the same stimulus, people are going to have different responses to the exact same situation. And what's funny about it is, like, we would argue, like, we feel it's so right that it's like, no, that bird is free. Look at it. It's like going, and it's just like, whoa, it's cruising. And you could argue just as strong, like, no, it's like, look, where is the another bird?
Which, in knowing these differences, is really, really important, because what we do in relationships is we project, especially, let's say, if you live a little bit more in the red or you live a little bit more in the blue, you interpret other people's actions based on your own projections. So it often impacts the way you see things. Now, the important part of that is the projections exist for all sorts of reasons. We mentioned in a slide above that it impacts the brain development. It impacts the type of wiring that you get. If you have rich emotional support, then being close to somebody early wired in as something that's positive. If you were young and you had a longing for more connection, and people weren't actually
were frightening,
and they weren't able to
rejecting.
Yeah, they weren't able to consistently give that to you, right? Then your body learns to adapt, and it's a healthy adaptation.
Right. And in this case, So even just the presence of another person, even if they're trying to be supportive, can hit my threat system in this case, in this example, because I had learned to take care of myself. And now all of a sudden there's somebody here and I don't have a body experience of somebody being present, and that it actually helps me. It helps soothe me. There's a relief that comes. So
But yeah, but if I interpret that other people being close to me is positive, and I try to come close to Sue and she pushes me away, if I'm in my system and I'm not aware of it, I could take that as a personal rejection rather than Sue's nervous system. And what these glasses represent, we'll get more deeply, but and I wish we had more time to talk about that. Wait, yes. Okay. So what those glasses represent is that research shows a lot of differences in the way that we take in information, the way we regulate emotions because of the differences in our brain functioning. And these differences do exist if you lean in the blue or you live highly in the blue or you lean in the red or live highly in the red as your map. You will actually take in a different amount of information. We can't go into all the details. This course can't let you do that, but we will see somebody who lives more in the blue really does not actually take in the same amount of emotional information as somebody who is living in the green or living in the red, where somebody, for example, in the red, they're going to take in a heightened amount of emotional information. So
it's a little bit exaggerated. So their memory of relational events is stronger. They ruminate. So basically the gist of this right here is that if somebody's blue, they're not being a jerk.
Yeah.
Right. And that they forgot because it didn't register as important. It didn't hit, like there really is a way that they miss cues. And we did the blue sunglasses, imagine like aviator sunglasses, right? Because it limits what comes in, but it also limits what you're expressing. So that's blue. And then red is these that they're bigger and they're kind of thick sunglasses that you feel everything very strongly, and it's going to have a negative tilt because you're looking for betrayal or abandonment. So they're not exaggerating, they're not crazy. It is hitting their system, like with you and I, it's hitting your system at an 8, but really it might be a 5 or a 6. And so it's really good to know and to remember about these sunglasses and the sunglass distortions.
And that they're literal distortions. And that doesn't mean if you live in the blue, you shouldn't take in more emotional information. It means you have to know that you might struggle with that.
Yeah, and that causes you to devalue it because it just isn't striking you as important. So then you end up being devaluing, like what, or care, like you start tearing up, and that hits the threat system because I'm not used to that. Now, so then I'm pushing away, and then you're, it's a whole crazy cycle.
So knowing these differences. So we're talking about brain science differences, but this is kind of how it looks in relationships or in bodies. And as you read these, and these, again, everybody varies. It's a spectrum. It doesn't mean if you're blue, you do all these. If you have a blue leaning map, or if you're red, you do all these. It doesn't mean that, because remember the spectrum. But this is how it shows up in couples therapy. This is how it shows up in just real relationships. And you might notice how they could trigger each other, right? Like if somebody has a pressure to go towards the relationship.
Why haven't you responded? You haven't texted. Why haven't you? Yeah. And we get wordy. That's one of the things.
If you're in
the red,
but I'm
texting you, I'm texting you, which can evoke.
Right. If I'm
leaning in,
you could see that that's going to impact my nervous system to pull away because that's overwhelming.
Which is going to do what to me?
And it's going to then trigger the crap out of you. So if we slow that down for a second, think about your relationships. This is part of why our focus is not just moving attachments. Like, I need to go find blue. I need to go figure out what vulnerability is. That's actually not, we can't do that. But if we have insight, instead of we believe our reality that somebody is that it expresses themselves really highly as too sensitive, if we really believe that reality, we're going to respond in a whole different way. If we go, okay, wait, my nervous system tells me that vulnerability is overwhelming. And these differences are really important. We've got to move on, but we can't go into too many more details here. But just if you think about this, where do you feel like you land? Where do the people you love live?
Right. I want to say something else too about the blue. One of the tricky things about the blue is that it is, you think you're fine
Yeah, yeah.
because you're not in touch with the vulnerability and you're probably missing some cues. And so everybody else looks a little needy or crazy or just
Too sensitive.
They're too sensitive, right? So especially folks that lean blue, really, really, there's no distress.
Yeah.
Unless that their close people begin to say, "I need more from you."
So
that'll raise the stress right there for sure.
That's actually when we get. So let's think about it. So we're coming back to this. I know that we're doing a very Reader's Digest version through this information. So we hope we're not overwhelming the system. But
right, and yeah, if you guys want to know more about any of this, we said, there's several resources. One of which, the best one, probably is the course that's going to be coming out. And there's going to be a special offer at the end of this.
Because we're going to go slow on this. But if we take a look at this now, because now you can probably see a little bit more understanding of what this represents. And part of this is a visual reminder, like, where do you live? Where would you thumbtack yourself? And we'll also be sending you some reflection questions when you get the follow-up email to kind of help you to stimulate these thoughts and other ideas. You might notice, though, that there's a puddle. So you see the tree. The tree represents the reminder.
Yep.
The context and also your history. You see the glasses, which represent the further activated you are, the more distorted your images are. The top one is about how we learn to regulate and dysregulate each other.
And impact each other.
So the puddle, and we'll just take a drop there because we can't go into it. That represents when either through trauma or overwhelm that we drop into a puddle of disorganization. Some of us have had
tie-dye puddle.
Yeah, and
it's a mix of a bunch of stuff.
And it's a tie-dye because it means that we often go to both. We use blue and red kind of intermix, and sometimes it doesn't. And that's what is disorganized about it. But we have to put a pin on this here.
But I do want to say that it is a strategy.
Yeah.
It can also be a strategy. It is the stepchild of attachment. This category is. And there's, again, places to deep dive.
Yes.
In this organization. But yeah, we're just.
And we all do it. We all have little spots. In fact, some could argue that there's a lot of world chaos creating disorganization for our world and for many of us. Mm-hmm. So learning how to work with that is super important.
So one of the things too, we just want to mention about healing is that healing is not a 4 steps to whatever. And we explained that earlier, why that doesn't work. Yeah. Even when it's like you get the light bulb and it's great, that we need more. So first, the whole idea is that you have to even know that there's an issue. And if you think about people in your life, not everybody is even thinking about that or interested in that. But we've got to begin to then put together and reflect on, okay, is that a trigger or is that just a feeling? Triggers being related to implicit memory, when our stored history is coming into the present. You're late, and rather than me just being irritated with you, I think you died.
Right.
Or I think you're giving me a message that you don't care.
Or I'm being disrespectful.
That's right. So those are those projections that now if I begin to really work to what does that mean? Right. Oh, I noticed that I always think people are trying to get away from me.
Right.
Right. So this is where we're like little detectives and we begin to put it together. But even and this part is fun, when you're in the reflection mode, and by the way, this spiral, we talk about something, it goes up and then maybe it resolves or it goes better and then it comes back around, and it'll do that 1,000 times. It doesn't mean you're doing the wrong thing. But notice it's a spiral. It does move. It's not just a circle.
That is huge too, because in working with people, it's so easy for people to not recognize the movement, because we are taught through so much of the marketed psychology.
I've already talked about my sexual abuse.
Yeah.
I've already talked about my divorce or whatever.
We're also taught, though, 5 easy steps to hacking your this and that, and to really recognize that is actually can be very shaming, and that this is a natural progression to change, and that this kind of thing really literally does rewire.
Yes.
Every small connection.
And so to get it into implicit, you have to have new experience.
Yeah.
For sure.
All right. So this is a worksheet you'll be sent. So this is something just to help you jot down, think about what are the ways that you know that you're in a secure place? And you'd have to do like, think of a body feeling. Because when you're in a secure place, you can feel curious,
What does your secure place
open.
feel like?
Oh, I
But
can
we talked about vocal tone.
a vocal tone. I'm calmer. I don't feel pressure. I feel curious. One of the biggest signs is curiosity. I know when all the political wrath that's been happening, I went through a serious period of time where I was actually super activated and thought I was the sane one. I'm like ready to tell everybody how they're wrong. And I'm super activated, but I'm pressured. And not that when you're in the green, it does not mean you're not angry. It does not mean it is.
Well, hell no. It's
like,
and it's an effective place to be.
so
You
to
have your voice.
So to answer your question there, how will I know when I'm angry if I'm actually in a secure zone versus more of a defensive activation? Well, if I'm angry, but I still can hold to myself and recognize that that we're different and that I can tolerate that.
And
that is a huge
and that
part.
you're going to impact them. You share
Yes.
this will impact them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really, to me, it's when you give a shit. If you give a shit about yourself and about your close people, you're pretty close. It does not mean that you're calm. It does not mean that you're calm or that that you're not feeling big feelings. It's that you can have the big feeling and hold on to your heart.
That's a good point. Yeah. So this is the kind of the last slide, but this is one of the things, and we obviously can't drop any further deeper, but in some just notes of how to get to that green place, the secure relating. We've talked about some of these. What are your signs, right? Story follows state, to kind of really, really remember that the narrative you're telling yourself is based on your activation on that spectrum. And then you're telling the story. Grounding yourself first. One of the things that we talked a lot about that I want to really highlight is understanding the difference between a feeling and a trigger. You were just asking me whether I'm in the green, whether I'm in the green zone or not. If I'm rushing, if I feel the pressure to run, fight, or flee, or fix.
You're rushing now. Does that mean that you're?
I'm activated now.
So, one of the things that we really want to think in terms of, like, if we could just give you something because you showed up, besides our little discount that we're going to do on our course, that if we could help you cultivate the feeling of awe in your body, it is one of the most powerful things that you can do to take care of your nervous system. And this doesn't just mean looking at the Grand Canyon. This doesn't have to be these big events.
Yeah.
This can be like the awe of, I don't know how many people are here, but there's all of these people from all over the world that have gathered, that have stopped their busy lives and come together. And so there's a community. There's a community on the chat. You guys are talking to one another. Y'all are connecting with strangers. That can create a feeling of awe. So this is just, again, a note, right? We are we are all called. I think we're called. That's part of why you're here. You were called to be here, in a sense, not just for your profession. Friends, neighbors, family, citizens, lovers of the world, this generation in time, this species, we are called to support one another in cultivating wholeness, which is another word for security. And so we want to invite you to turn, to use your mind to hold on to hope is really important right now. There's so much despair, to hold on to hope. And orienting away from death, meaning despair, dissociation, giving up, towards life.
Right. And I love the concept of hope, is we feel like with everything going on, hope is sort of a thing that we don't have the right to have, but it's the only way that we engage. Otherwise, we go to either end of those continuum, and we hadn't talked about this, but everything that we've talked about within our bodies and relationships also happens in our community. So we have a collective hijack because we're all connected. The more activated we stay, and the more we each individually let ourselves stay either highly activated in the red, or we disconnect and say, I don't care, I give up, which we're all tempted to do, then we will all stay disconnected. So that's the point of the excitement about y'all showing up today, people tuning into the podcast or the course, is that this is a collective group of individuals who, if we continue to spread the sense of building security moment by moment, we can calm our collective nervous system. And then we don't tune into things that activate us and piss us off, but don't help us feel connected.
So we invite everybody to get engaged locally, find the project. If you need to rest, let yourself rest. I was talking to a woman yesterday that is a leader in the Black community here in Austin. And she said she was on this DEI meeting with all these people getting fired, these Black women getting fired, long career people getting fired because of some of the changes in the, that are coming down. And you know what she said? She said she just sat back and was listening, and she just started saying, get your colonoscopy.
Put your mask on.
Yeah. Take care of your body.
Yeah.
Check out that, that immune thing that's going on. It was really powerful.
You're going to want to tune. Her name's Pam Benson Owen.
Yeah, that hasn't published yet, but
it'll be on an upcoming podcast.
But that takes us back to, y'all, this podcast if you liked this, you're going to love the podcast. We encourage you to subscribe. That way the things will go. If you're new, if you'll please subscribe through Spotify, because this weird thing happened where we got disconnected and we lost about 1,000 reviews and a whole bunch of followers. So it's kind of hurting us. But yeah, Spotify, even if you listen on another thing, if you go to Spotify and give us something, that'd be great.
Yeah.
We've got an email list, Facebook community. We have a private online community. We call them our neuro nerds, for as little as $5 a month, or more, depending on what you're able to give. Then there's some educational opportunities. You get an ad-free feed. I love that particular part. No ads. The other thing we want to mention is the ads that we do. We give half of all of those corporate funds to mental health care for those that are traditionally left out. So that's one of our
ways of just using the platform.
We've got the book. We really encourage you. Ann read the Audible, so she has a beautiful voice, and so she can be in your ear
when I'm not activated.
That's right. And then you're also doing the Vitality series is coming up, which is live small meetings like this, except everybody would see each other. And it's just really to build, brewing vitality, to build vitality. So that's available. And then for sure our course, which goes into these things in much more depth, including
and we're not rushing
what to do about it, including the what to do about it for sure. If you're red, if you're tie-dye, if you're blue, all the things. And if your partner is any of those things, how to stay engaged. And then also the Psychotherapy Networker in March, we're going to be there. I'm going to invite you to come and join us live. We went for the first time last
year. It's a blast. Loved it.
We were surprised at how good it was. And then this is about the course. And then the special offer, here we go.
So while we leave this up there,
yeah,
let's take some questions. I know.
Yeah.
Yep, you had a few questions come in. Let me see here.
This is Alex from Collectively Rooted, who has helped organize this webinar. Thank you. And Laura,
the huge Collectively Rooted has been so wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you both. Let's see here. There were several questions. I don't know if we'll have time to answer all of them, but here we go.
Grab a couple.
Yeah, we had, this is really interesting from Laura. She's asking, does the description of your work apply, or how does it apply to neurodivergent humans?
100%. There's a whole chapter in our book about this, about the misunderstandings related to that. It does still apply 100%. Even if you're neurodivergent, you can still lean red or blue or tie-dye, that all still does matter, but it looks different. And the big thing with neurodivergence is it's so easy to misunderstand it. That's why we made a point of saying that what we're calling the connection system or the social engagement system or the vagal system, green zone, does not mean that you have to want to be close. So I'm glad that you brought that up. We do a whole, the whole chapter is not just on neurodiversity, but it's included in that about systems. And thank you for bringing that up.
It's another example of people misreading a neurodivergence individual within attachment lens, and then overly considering somebody insecure or pathological. So what else? That's a great question though.
Thank you. All right, let's see. We have a question here from Ruth. She's asking, or she's saying, I would love to hear your thoughts on clients or humans who appear to have little to no ability or willingness to self-reflect on patterns. Where do we go from there?
Yeah, I do have thoughts about that around because I think right now, at least, I'm in the mode, and I would invite other people to be in the mode of this, um, focusing on connections and focusing on self-care. And so I think of it like, we're all, you're either on the bus to do the work, or you really are blocking it out. And I want to save my energies for those that are open to human rights, open to not being perfect, open to doing the work. So there's something about being protective because, especially, a lot of us are socialized to give and give and give and to fix and to hold the emotional weight. And so the way the question was framed made me think, like, if that's not mutual, if that's not, that these guys have got to catch up. And I don't mean just people raised as men, but I mean the folks that just are taking, they're just, another woman I spoke with talked about the idea of human winning versus instead of human being. And that some of us that are socialized where that, it's one on top of the, it's hierarchical, it's the patriarchy, it's the win, 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 win is the thing. That's really different than what we're talking about here.
And I would add,
And we want to rescue some of these folks that are in that lane where that they have not been socialized to look at and value emotions.
that's what I wanted to say a little
Yeah.
bit to that too, is that sometimes that's one reason why we love people thinking of things related to learned attachment, because sometimes our difficulty self-reflecting is our blocks, and that it's hitting part of our threat system in a way that blocks it. And when we have with different ways, we mentioned them in the course in the book, of getting into that without it being frontal assaulted, to where we invite people where they feel more open and wanting to self-reflect. And I find that happen a lot.
That's really true. And that's actually what we're doing now, right? We want to spread this information. It's you, it's not you, it's your amygdala.
Yeah.
And if somebody who's otherwise looks closed and then they become open, as a couples therapist, you even people that are kind of used to having their way and blah blah blah, once you can, and what we call it, enter on the left with reason and science, and you can get some lids open for sure.
Kind of where some of the framework developed is entering on the left.
Entering on the left, that's right.
Anything else, Alex?
Now let's take one more if there's one handy, and then again, I want to remind y'all about the Vitality series to sit with Ann live in person. That's going to happen once a month.
On video.
Well,
video conferencing, but in person. Right. Yeah.
And then the course, and then the podcast, and then the book. All kinds of ways to connect.
Okay.
All right.
Right. Yep, there's one. I mean, there are several more questions, but one is really interesting here from Alicia. She's saying, in addition to spontaneously and guilelessly moving across the spectrum, is it also common to see people cultivate a false attachment MO, depending on situations, i.e., deliberately trying to appear more blue or red than they actually feel?
Absolutely. In fact, that's such a complex question. One of the thoughts that I have is that sometimes somebody can be doing that consciously, right? And that's different than somebody doing it in a chameleon style. We talk about this in the course, and that through different angles, different places of trauma, I might have learned that for me to actually keep people close, I need to mirror them or match them. That's one way we might then appear one way because we're serving what we believe the other person wants.
Fawning.
Kind of fawning. Anyway, what thoughts do you have?
Well, I thought of code switching. Right? That especially if you are in a discriminated population, and so your language, your body, that you might broadcast something different here than you do there, maybe because you feel safe here and not safe here, and but all the reasons. And that code switching is one of those other things that can be misinterpreted in this pathological or negative way. But I would love to have more of a conversation. If you guys want to reach out to us, you can find us at info@Therapist Uncensored. Also, you can reach us directly at Ann at Therapist Uncensored or Sue at Therapist Uncensored. And
I want to take one more question.
Do we have time?
Can we? Ooh, a minute.
Sure, we have 1 minute. Let's see here.
You're an optimizer.
It's so true. Well, you know what it is? It's like when you have a group of people
I
out
know it's
here.
hard to say goodbye.
It is. It is. And I want to do a special shout out to Delane Kinney, because what's been so wonderful is that that's the only actual face that we can see right now. And y'all two have been so lovely. And I wish we could see everybody, because
I'm so glad.
but
That's great.
the reason I say that is that, like, if you're here because this matters, and deepening yourself and deepening connections is important. And that's our people. And so it's hard to let y'all go. I want more of y'all.
All right. Well,
Well, do you want one more question?
I guess I set us up. Yes, one more.
Okay.
I guess can the group tolerate it? I guess.
yeah, we'll do yeah.
One more.
We'll hang
One
around.
more.
All right.
Elaine, should we do one more question? Okay.
Okay. Let's see. How about this one from Shannon? How can you help someone who strongly believes that only what they think consciously is true or real to understand about implicit memory and how it impacts their life or responses?
Oh God, that's like, I love that question. I think that is one reason, honestly, that we went with this model, because when we start talking about observations, like when we start helping people recognize behaviors rather than challenging their thoughts, like, do you find yourself thinking and feeling this way? And then you go, do you recognize that it's actually a protective defense that was adaptive at one point? I've really seen that opens people up to wanting to hear more.
Well, what I would say is it especially helps when you give them challenging requests, behavioral requests. So somebody's saying, let's say somebody's in the blue and they're like, I'm fine. Like, no,
yeah.
that's stupid. Feelings are stupid. Like, well, they're stupid because they make you irrational and I'm rational. I bet nobody knows anybody like that. But then if you say, okay, you're good, you're chill, whatever.
Yeah.
I want you to turn to your partner and make, have eye gaze.
Deep eye contact.
Right. Or maybe, or even like, let's say the partner's not there. I want you to imagine putting your head in whoever, your partner's lap.
Yeah.
And looking up at them. And I believe me, they're going to get an affective response.
Yes.
And then they're going to feel their threat. And then now we're like, see, there really is more going on than we think. The other thing I would say is leaning on the science, that there's a ton of stuff out there that is just neuroscience about the importance of the horse, about the importance of the unconscious. And
I like that.
story.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, again, thank you, Alex. Thank you, Laura.
Yeah, thank everyone for that you took your time out to show up today.
Yeah, that's right. And also spread the word about this. And we hope that we see you in one of these communities. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
Everybody.
Bye-bye.